The laughter hadn't even settled when he stepped forward, set a sack on the table, and said he'd marry her. So why did she look at him like she was deciding whether to walk away for good? A chair scraped hard against the wooden floor as Marjorie set her basket down, the smell of warm bread still clinging to the cloth. No one helped her. No one spoke to her. The laughter lingered in the room like dust. Then boots sounded from the doorway, slow, deliberate, and the air shifted. Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just stood there, waiting, like the choice wasn't his to take. Marjorie's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, her eyes steady, unreadable, as if she knew something no one else did. Would you have answered him, or walked away? Stay with me and tell me what you would have done. The wind came down off the hills that morning, thin and dry, carrying dust across the open yard in front of the wooden church. Folks had gathered early. Wagons lined the road. Horses stamped slow and patient near the hitching posts. Someone had set up a long table with bread, jars of preserves, and a dented coffee pot that never quite stayed hot. They talked about the weather first. They always did. Then the grass. Then the price of feed. And then, like it always seemed to happen, the talk shifted. Marjorie Ellis stood near the end of the table, her hands wrapped around a woven basket lined with cloth. She had brought sweet bread. You could smell the cinnamon even through the dust. She didn't set it down right away, just held it there like she hadn't decided yet if it belonged among the others. "She's still baking for two?" a man said, not loud, but not quiet either. A couple of heads turned. Someone chuckled. Another voice came in, lighter. "She ought to put that energy into chickens. At least they lay something useful." That got a bigger laugh. Not cruel, not sharp, just easy. The kind that rolled out because nobody felt the need to stop it. Marjorie didn't move. Her fingers tightened slightly against the basket handle. The cloth inside shifted, and for a moment it looked like she might turn away. But she didn't. She stood there, steady, her gaze fixed somewhere just past the edge of the table, as if the sound had passed right through her without finding a place to land. A woman reached over and took one of the jars, avoiding Marjorie's eyes. "You gonna set that down or carry it home again?" Marjorie lowered the basket at last, set it gently on the wood, smoothed the cloth once, twice. Her hands were steady, too steady. At the far edge of the yard, near the fence line, Silas Boone had just come up from the lower road. He paused without meaning to. He had a sack slung over one shoulder, the kind used for salt blocks. His hat sat low, shadowing most of his face. From where he stood, he could see the table, the people gathered around it, the way the laughter rose and then settled like dust. He didn't step in right away, just stood there, watching. He saw the way Marjorie held herself, not stiff, not proud, just still, like she had learned the shape of these moments and how to stand inside them without breaking anything. Someone said something else, softer this time, still enough to draw a few more laughs. Silas shifted the sack on his shoulder. Then he started walking. Boots pressed into the dry ground, slow and even. No rush, no hesitation. The kind of pace that didn't ask for attention, but got it anyway. One or two people noticed first. The talking didn't stop, but it thinned out. By the time he reached the table, the laughter had already begun to die. He set the sack down with a quiet thud against the wood. A small cloud of dust rose up around it. The sound was enough to pull the last of the voices into silence. Silas rested one hand on the table, fingers spread. He didn't look at anyone in particular. Then he spoke. "If no one's asking her," he said, voice low, steady, "I will." No one answered. A few people shifted their weight. Someone cleared their throat but didn't follow it with words. It wasn't the kind of thing folks heard every day. Not said like that. Not out in the open, where it couldn't be taken back or laughed off. Marjorie lifted her head. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Silas met her gaze, didn't hold it hard, didn't press, just stood there, waiting, as if he had already said everything he meant to say. The wind moved through the yard again, catching the edge of her dress, brushing a strand of hair loose across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. For a moment, it felt like the whole place had narrowed down to the space between them. The table, the people, the church behind them. Everything else faded into the background, quiet and uncertain. Marjorie's eyes searched his face, not for kindness, not for charm, for something steadier, something that didn't shift with the mood of a crowd. She didn't speak. Not yes, not no. Just looked at him, long enough that the silence started to stretch. Then she lowered her gaze, turned slightly, and adjusted the cloth over her basket again, though it didn't need it. The moment passed. Or maybe it didn't. It just changed shape. Behind them, someone finally let out a breath. Another man muttered something under his breath, but it didn't carry. Silas picked his hand up from the table. He didn't repeat himself, didn't explain. Just stood there 1 second longer, then turned slightly, as if he meant to give her room to choose what came next. The wind kept moving through dry Cedar Creek, same as it always did. Dust, quiet voices, the creak of wagon wheels settling. But something in the air had shifted. Small, barely there. Like the first crack in a surface that had held too long. And no one, not even the ones who had laughed, could quite pretend they hadn't seen it. By the time the gathering broke apart, the wind had picked up again. Wagons rolled out one by one, wheels creaking over the dry road. Voices stayed low. People didn't linger the way they usually did. Marjorie left without speaking to anyone. She carried the empty basket against her hip, the cloth inside folded tight and neat. Her steps were steady, but quicker than before. She kept to the side of the road, past the fence line, toward the narrow trail that led out to the edge of the trees. Silas watched her go. He didn't follow right away. He stood there until the yard had nearly cleared, until the last horse had been untied and led off. Then he picked up his sack again, slung it over his shoulder, and started down the same road. The trail curved past a dry creek bed, then narrowed where the brush grew thicker. Marjorie's house sat beyond that, a small place with a slanted roof and a porch that leaned just enough to notice. When Silas reached the gate, he stopped. The latch was tied with a strip of cloth instead of rope. He untied it carefully, opened the gate just wide enough to step through, and closed it behind him the same way. Marjorie was already on the porch. She had set the basket down on a wooden chair. One sleeve was rolled back, and there was flour still caught along the edge of her wrist. She hadn't changed, hadn't rushed. She saw him before he reached the steps. "You came anyway," she said. Her voice was even, not sharp, not welcoming. Silas took his hat off as he stepped up onto the porch. He didn't move closer than he had to. "I said I would." She studied him for a moment, then glanced past him toward the trail, as if expecting someone else to appear behind him. No one did. "What you said back there," she went on, "that wasn't a small thing." "I know. You didn't sound like a man joking." "I wasn't." The wind moved through the trees behind the house, carrying the faint smell of pine and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a loose shutter tapped against wood. Marjorie rested one hand on the back of the chair. Her fingers curled around the worn edge. "Then say it again," she said. "Here, where no one's watching." Silas didn't hesitate. "I'm asking you to marry me." No rush, no extra words. She let that sit between them. "Why?" she asked. Silas reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers. The edges were worn soft from being handled too often. He held them out, but didn't step closer. Gordon Pike filed notice last week, he said. Claims the land along the East Creek runs into his boundary. Says I don't have the right claim without a household. Says it's unused. Marjorie didn't take the papers yet. So you need a wife, she said. I need a legal one, Silas answered. That almost sounded like it might turn into a smile, but it didn't. She reached forward then and took the papers, opened them just enough to see the marks, the signatures, the lines drawn where someone else had decided what belonged to who. Her eyes moved slow across the page. And you thought of me, she said. Silas didn't answer that right away. I thought of someone who wouldn't pretend, he said at last. She folded the papers again, sharper this time, and handed them back. And what do I get? She asked. Silas looked at her, steady. A place that's yours to stand in, he said. No one tells you to leave it. That's all? It's what I can promise. Marjorie let out a breath through her nose, not quite a laugh. You don't make this sound like much of a marriage. It wouldn't be, he said. Not the kind folks talk about. Silence settled again. A loose board on the porch creaked as she shifted her weight. No interference, she said finally. My work stays mine. My space stays mine. Silas nodded once. No pretending, she added. Not for them. Not for you. Another nod. She looked past him again, out toward the trees, where the light had started to thin. You understand what people will say. They already are. That stopped her. For a moment, something in her expression softened. Not enough to show, but enough to notice. When? She asked. Soon as the papers are signed. She considered that. Then she turned, walked to the door, and pushed it open just enough to reach inside. When she came back, she held a small cloth pouch. She tied it to her belt with a practiced motion. I'll bring what I need, she said. Nothing more. Silas stepped back off the porch, giving her room. She picked up the basket last, almost as an afterthought, then followed him down the steps. They didn't walk side by side at first. The path was too narrow for that. The sun had started to drop behind the hills, casting long shadows across the trail. Their footsteps fell into rhythm without either of them trying. By the time the ranch came into view, the sky had turned the color of worn copper. The house stood wide and quiet against the open land. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. Marjorie stopped at the gate. She looked at the place for a long moment, taking in the fences, the barn, the stretch of land that ran out toward the creek. Then she stepped through. Inside, the house was as empty as it looked. A table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner room. Everything clean. Everything in its place, Tom. Nothing left out by accident. Silas set the papers on the table. Marjorie placed her basket beside them. That was all. Later, they sat across from each other with a simple meal, bread, a piece of salted meat, coffee poured into tin cups. They didn't speak much. The wind pressed softly against the walls. The boards answered back with small, familiar sounds. At one point, their eyes met across the table. Not long. Just enough. Then both of them looked away. Outside, the gate creaked once in the dark, then settled. Inside, 2 people sat at the same table, in the same room, under the same roof, and neither of them reached across the space between. Morning came early on the ranch. The first light slipped through the thin curtains, catching dust in the air before settling across the wooden floor. Marjorie was already awake. She moved quietly, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth, her sleeves rolled just enough to keep them out of the way. She stepped outside before the sun had fully cleared the hills. The ground still held the night's chill. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of the trough near the barn. The horses shifted when they heard her boots, ears turning before their bodies followed. She didn't speak to them, just checked the water, ran a hand along the fence line, paused where one of the posts leaned slightly out of place. She noticed things. That was the first thing that changed. By the time Silas came out, the coffee was already set on the table inside. Steam rose from the tin cup she'd left for him, untouched. He didn't thank her. He drank it anyway. Days passed like that. Not quiet, exactly. Just careful. Marjorie kept to her side of the work. She cleaned, mended, wrote numbers into a small ledger she had found in one of the drawers. Feed, tools, repairs. She wrote neatly, pressing the pencil hard enough that the mark stayed even when the paper shifted. Silas didn't ask her to. He just noticed the numbers made more sense than before. Out near the eastern fence, the land dipped toward the creek Gordon Pike claimed. The posts there had always needed watching. One afternoon, Silas rode out and found two of them knocked loose, the wire slack and dragging. Cattle tracks crossed the boundary line. Not his. He didn't say anything when he came back. Just set his hat down harder than usual and went to fetch tools. Marjorie watched from the porch, her hand resting still on the railing. She didn't ask questions. Later, she walked the same stretch on foot. She knelt near the broken post, touched the ground where the soil had been disturbed. Her fingers brushed over a boot print, then another, deeper one. Not a mistake. She stood slowly, looking out toward the neighboring land. No one in sight. Just open ground and a line that didn't mean much until someone decided it did. That evening, she wrote something new in the ledger. Fence repair, wire, labor. She paused before closing it, then added one more line beneath. Loss. A few nights later, the wind came in stronger. It rattled the shutters and carried a loose board against the side of the barn. The horses grew restless. One of them kicked hard enough to send a sharp crack through the wood. Marjorie reached the barn first. She moved through the dim light without hesitation, lantern swinging low. One of the younger horses had caught its leg against a splintered edge. Not deep, but enough to bleed. She set the lantern down, tore a strip from the inside lining of her skirt, and pressed it firm against the wound. The horse jerked once, then stilled under her hand. "Easy," she said, barely above a whisper. She didn't hear Silas step in behind her. He stopped at the doorway, watched. The way she worked, steady, no wasted motion, the way the horse leaned into her hand instead of away from it. He took a step forward, then stopped again. Didn't ask if she needed help. Didn't offer. He turned, filled a bucket with clean water, and set it just inside the stall. Close enough for her to reach, not close enough to crowd her. Then he walked back out. Marjorie glanced once at the bucket, said nothing, used it anyway. By morning, the horse stood easier. She checked the wound again, replaced the cloth, then wiped her hands clean against a rag she'd found hanging on a nail. At breakfast, Silas sat across from her. He looked at her hands, the faint stain of dried blood at the edge of her sleeve. He nodded once. That was all. The next day, he fixed the broken stall board before the wind could catch it again. They didn't speak about it. In town, the talk had already started. By the time Marjorie walked into the small general store 2 days later, the room went quieter than it should have. Mrs. Hargrove stood behind the counter, counting out change into a customer's hand. She smiled too quickly when she saw Marjorie. "You settling in all right?" she asked. Marjorie placed a small list on the counter. Flour, salt, thread. "We're managing," she said. A man near the stove shifted in his chair. "Heard you got yourself a fine arrangement," he muttered, not looking up. No one laughed this time, but the words stayed. Marjorie took the items one by one, checked the weight, counted her coins carefully. She didn't rush, didn't leave anything unfinished. When she stepped back outside, the wind had died down again. Silas was waiting near the hitching post. He took the sack from her without asking. Their hands brushed for a second, just long enough to notice. They walked back in silence. Halfway down the road, Marjorie spoke. "They're going to push harder," she said. Silas didn't look at her. "I know." She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, eyes forward. "They won't believe this is real." Silas's grip tightened slightly on the reins. "It doesn't have to be for them." She glanced at him then, just once. "No," she said. "It doesn't." The ranch came into view again, wide and still under the afternoon light. But something had shifted, not in what they said, in what they didn't. And for the first time since she stepped through that gate, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt held. The notice came 2 mornings later, folded once, pinned to the ranch gate with a small iron tack. The paper had softened at the edges from the night air. Silas found it when he stepped out with a bucket in hand. He didn't open it right away, just stood there, looking at the handwriting across the front. He knew the shape of it, knew who had sent it before he even broke the seal. Inside, Marjorie was at the table with her ledger. He walked in, set the paper down beside her, and said nothing. She read it once, then again, slower. "Hearing set for Thursday," she said. "Town Hall." Silas pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The wood creaked under his weight. "They're moving quick. They want it settled before winter," she said. Her finger rested on the last line of the page, a name signed at the bottom. Gordon Pike. She closed the paper carefully, pressing the fold flat. "Then we'll be there," she said. The day of the hearing came in cold. Clouds hung low over Dry Cedar Creek, pressing the light down until everything looked dull and gray. The town hall sat near the center road, a wide wooden building with a single door and windows that rattled when the wind passed through. People had gathered before them, not as many as a Sunday, but enough. Silas tied the horse outside. Marjorie stepped down from the wagon on her own, smoothing her skirt once before turning toward the door. They didn't walk in together. Not quite. He opened the door. She stepped through first. He followed. Inside, the room carried the smell of old wood and damp coats. Benches lined both sides. A long table stood at the front, papers stacked in neat rows. Gordon Pike was already there. He stood near the front, speaking quietly with 2 men Marjorie didn't recognize. His coat was clean, pressed, boots polished. He looked up when they entered. His eyes moved over Marjorie first, then settled on Silas. A small nod. Not polite, just acknowledgement. They took seats near the back. The murmur of voices filled the room, rising and falling like wind through dry grass. A few heads turned. Some held their gaze longer than needed. Marjorie kept her eyes forward. The hearing began without ceremony. A clerk read out the claim. Boundaries, rights, use of land. Words that sounded clean on paper but carried weight in how they were used. Gordon's side spoke first. One of the men stepped forward, laying out a map across the table. Lines drawn in ink, straight and certain. "This section here," he said, tapping near the eastern creek, "has not been maintained as active property. No household. No continuous use." Silas didn't move. Marjorie's hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly folded. Another man was called. He spoke about fences left broken, about cattle crossing lines, about land that didn't look claimed enough to matter. Each word landed slow, measured, careful. Then came the question. "Mr. Boone," the clerk said, "your claim depends in part on established household presence. Do you have a lawful wife residing on the property?" Silas looked up. "Yes." A pause. "Is she present?" Silas turned slightly, just enough. Marjorie stood. She walked forward on her own. No rush, no hesitation. She stopped at the front, facing the table. The clerk adjusted his papers. "State your name." "Marjorie Ellis." "And your relation to Mr. Boone?" A quiet settled over the room. Marjorie didn't answer right away. She looked across the space, past the table, past the men with their maps and their ink lines. Somewhere near the back, someone shifted on a bench. Her gaze moved once across the room. Faces she knew, faces that had laughed. Then she spoke. "I signed my name," she said. "I decide what it means." A murmur moved through the benches. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to be heard. The clerk glanced toward Gordon, then back at her. "That does not answer the question," he said. Marjorie held his gaze. "It answers what matters." Silas remained where he was. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt. He let her stand there alone. The hearing paused, not ended. Just paused. The clerk cleared his throat, shuffled his papers. "We will reconvene after review," he said. "This matter is not yet settled." People began to rise. Voices returned, quieter than before. Marjorie stepped back from the table. She didn't look toward Silas. Didn't wait. She walked straight to the door and out into the cold air. By the time Silas reached outside, she was already at the wagon. She untied the reins, her movements quick but controlled. "Marjorie," he said. She didn't turn. "You didn't answer them," he said. She paused then, just for a second. "I answered enough." She climbed up onto the seat. Silas stood beside the wheel, one hand resting against the wood. "You leaving?" he asked. She looked ahead, not at him. "I need time." He didn't reach for her, didn't try to stop her. After a moment, he stepped back. She flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward, wheels cutting through the dirt road, carrying her away from the town, past the fences, back toward the edge of the trees. Silas watched until she disappeared from view. Then he turned, walked back to the empty hitching post. The sky above stayed gray, the kind of gray that didn't promise rain, just held everything in place. Back at the ranch that night, the house felt larger than before. Too much space between walls. Too much quiet. Silas sat in the barn instead, one hand resting against the same post he always leaned on. He didn't move for a long time, didn't say anything, just listened to the sound of the horses shifting, the slow breath of the night settling in, and the absence of footsteps that should have come through the door. Morning came, but it didn't change much. The sky stayed low and pale. Frost clung to the fence wire again, thin as glass. Silas moved through the work without pause. He checked the troughs, mended a loose hinge on the gate, carried a sack of feed across the yard. He didn't look toward the road. By midday, the wind shifted. Warmer, carrying something different. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then closer. Silas stood still near the fence line, one hand resting on the post he had set straight just days before. The sound didn't pass. It came toward the house. A wagon rolled into view, wheels worn, moving steady over the dirt. Marjorie held the reins. She didn't rush the horse. Didn't slow it either. She drove past the gate, kept going, toward town. Silas watched her go again. This time, he didn't follow. The hall filled quicker than before. Word had spread. By the time Marjorie stepped inside, the benches were nearly taken. Gordon Pike stood at the front again, but there was something tighter in his shoulders now. He wasn't smiling. Marjorie didn't sit. She walked straight to the front and set a folded bundle of papers on the table. The clerk reached for them, surprised enough to pause before opening them. "Proceed," he said. She didn't look at him. "Those claims," she said, her voice carrying without force, "they're not new." The clerk unfolded the papers. His brow pulled together as he read. "These deeds," he said slowly, They predate his filing," she finished. A murmur moved through the room. Gordon stepped forward. That land was forfeited. Marjorie turned then. "No," she said. "It was taken." Not louder, just clearer. She stepped closer to the table, placing one finger against a line on the page. "My family held that stretch along the creek," she said. "Before the lines were redrawn, before the filings changed hands." The clerk looked between the documents. "And you have record of this?" Marjorie met his gaze. "I kept what they left me." Silas stood near the back now. He hadn't meant to come, but he was there. He watched her from where the shadows gathered near the wall. Didn't step forward, didn't interrupt. Just stood. The room shifted around her, not in noise, in weight. Gordon's voice came again, sharper now. "This proves nothing about his claim." Marjorie didn't turn toward him. "It proves a pattern," she said. "Same lines, same method, different names." The clerk laid the papers flat, smoothing them with both hands. "We'll review this evidence, Masson," he said. "But it changes the standing of the claim." Silence followed. Not empty. Different. When the hearing closed, people didn't rush out. They stood, watched, looked at one another without quite speaking. Marjorie gathered her papers, tied them back into the cloth. She didn't search for Silas. Didn't need to. He stepped forward only when the room had begun to clear. They stood a few feet apart. No one else between them. "You came back," he said. Marjorie looked at him, steady. "I had something to finish." He nodded once. "That all?" he asked. She studied his face the same way she had that first day. Not for answers, for something that didn't shift. "I didn't come back for the hearing," she said. Silas didn't speak. The air between them held. Marjorie adjusted the bundle in her hands, then lowered it to her smartphone. "I came back," she said, "because I chose to." Silas let that settle. "You don't have to stay," he said, quiet. "I know." Neither of them moved. Outside, the wind had eased. The clouds were breaking, just enough to let a thin line of light fall across the road. Marjorie turned first. She stepped past him, out the door, into the open air. Silas followed, slower. At the wagon she paused, not climbing up right away, just standing there, one hand resting on the worn wood of the seat. Then she turned. Not fully, just enough. "If I stay," she said, "it won't be for papers." Silas met her eyes. "I wouldn't ask it to be." She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she climbed up, took the reins, and turned the wagon toward the road leading back to the ranch. This time he walked beside it. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. The road stretched out, dust settling under the late afternoon light. The fences ran long and straight toward the hills. The house waited at the end of it, same as before. Nothing changed. And everything had. By the time they reached the gate, the sky had cleared enough to show a thin blue line above the ridge. Marjorie stepped down. She untied the latch herself, pushed the gate open, walked through. Silas followed. Inside, the yard looked the same. The barn, the fence, the quiet stretch of land beyond. Marjorie set the reins down on the post and walked toward the house. She didn't stop at the door, just stepped inside like she had never left. Silas stood in the yard a moment longer. Then he moved. Slow, certain. He followed her in. The door closed behind them, soft against the frame, and for the first time, the space between them didn't wait to be crossed. It already had been. Evenings at the ranch grew quieter in a different way after that. Not empty, just settled. The kind of quiet that comes when two people stop guarding the same ground and start standing on it together. No grand words were spoken. No promises laid out like lines on paper. Just small things. A second cup poured without asking. A lantern left burning a little longer than needed. A gate closed behind the other before the wind could catch it. Out there, land was always being measured. By fences, by claims, by men who thought they could decide what belonged to who. But what Marjorie chose, and what Silas allowed without holding tight, that wasn't something you could draw a boundary around. It was built slow, in the pauses, in the moments neither of them tried to fill. And maybe that's the thing about love out here. It doesn't come when the world thinks it should. It doesn't ask if you're ready, or if you've been waiting too long. It just stands in front of you, quiet and steady, and leaves the choice in your hands. So if you had been standing where Marjorie stood, would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed and made it yours? If this story stayed with you, there are more like it waiting. Stories about people who found something real when they thought that part of their life had already passed them by.